In the days that followed, the media frenzy refused to die down. Every newspaper carried the story of Daisy's tearful encounter with the quadruplets. Some branded it the greatest redemption tale of our time, while others called it a stage spectacle to cleanse a dark past. But inside the Thompson household, life moved at its own pace. The children, though shaken, returned to their schools, projects, and dreams. Diana and Oliver shielded them as much as possible, refusing to let gossip dictate the course of their lives. Yet Daisy lingered in everyone's thoughts. 1 week later, Priscilla quietly visited the shelter where Daisy worked. She slipped in unnoticed, dressed simply, and found Daisy in the courtyard, cradling a malnourished baby with astonishing tenderness. Daisy looked older, her face lined not just with age but with regret carved deep. Priscilla watched for a long moment before stepping forward. Daisy gasped when she saw her. "You came," Daisy whispered, unable to believe it. "I wanted to see for myself," Priscilla said softly. She reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. "You're different here. This place, it suits you." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes. "This is all I have. The children are my penance and my blessing. I don't ask for a place in your family. Just knowing you're alive is enough." Priscilla hesitated, then said, "Family isn't about erasing the past. It's about deciding if the future can be different." She looked straight at Daisy. "I can't promise you my forgiveness, but I can promise you I'll visit again." From that day forward, the siblings took turns visiting the shelter. Timothy brought books. Tina taught sewing classes to the older girls. Peter fixed broken lights and water pumps, and Priscilla led the children in songs. At first, they avoided Daisy, keeping interactions minimal. But over time, they couldn't ignore the consistency of her service, the humility with which she lived. Slowly, cautiously, the wall between them began to crack. Diana noticed a change, too. One evening, she said to Oliver, "Perhaps the tree that once bore poison can now bear medicine." Oliver frowned but nodded. "We'll watch carefully. If Daisy has truly changed, then maybe God is writing a new chapter we never expected." The journey was far from over, but the first seeds of reintegration had been planted, not through speeches or tears, but through daily acts of service, witnessed by the very children she once wronged. The test came sooner than anyone expected. Months later, the shelter where Daisy worked faced a devastating crisis. A fire broke out one night in the kitchen, spreading quickly through the old wooden structure. Panic erupted as smoke filled the dormitories where more than 30 abandoned children slept. Daisy acted without hesitation. She smashed doors open, lifted children onto her back, dragged mattresses to block flames. Her arms and face were scorched, but she refused to stop until every child was safely outside. By the time the fire brigade arrived, Daisy collapsed on the ground, coughing and half-conscious, but surrounded by terrified little ones clinging to her as if she were their mother. News of her bravery spread rapidly. By morning, headlines read, "Fallen Ant turns hero. Daisy Thompson saves dozens in shelter fire." From infamy to sacrifice, is redemption real? The Thompson family rushed to the hospital where Daisy was being treated. Bandaged, weak, and barely able to speak, Daisy looked up as Diana entered with the children. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought, if I could save them, maybe God will forgive me," Daisy whispered hoarsely. Priscilla, trembling, took her hand. "You already proved it. You gave everything for those children without thinking of yourself." Timothy added, voice thick with emotion, "That's not the Daisy we feared. That's the Daisy who's becoming someone new." Oliver stood silently for a long time, then finally placed his hand on Daisy's shoulder. "Sacrifice speaks louder than any apology. Today you showed us the truth." Even Diana, who had carried the deepest scars, felt a shift in her heart. She whispered softly, "You once tried to take family from us, but now, perhaps, you found your way back into it, not by asking, but by giving." The children gathered closer around her hospital bed. They didn't call her Aunt Daisy yet, but for the first time, they didn't see her as a shadow of their past. They saw her as part of their unfolding future. Outside, reporters clamored for statements, but the Thompsons gave none. The reunion unfolding inside was not for cameras or headlines. It was for hearts learning how to heal. Recovery was slow. Daisy bore scars across her arms and face, a permanent reminder of the night she had risked everything. Yet, to her surprise, the Thompson family visited often, not out of obligation, but with a quiet sincerity that grew over time. The children were the first to soften. They would bring her little drawings, sit by her bed, and chatter about their day. Diana remained cautious, her heart pulled between memory and mercy, but even she could not ignore the way Daisy's presence seemed to shift. One afternoon, as Daisy was strong enough to walk again, Priscilla invited her to Sunday dinner. The family gathered, the long table glowing with laughter and food. Daisy hesitated at the doorway, trembling, until Timothy pulled out a chair for her. For the first time in years, Daisy sat at the same table with the family she once betrayed. No speeches, no apologies, only the sound of children giggling, dishes being passed, and Oliver quietly bowing his head to bless the meal. Weeks turned into months. Daisy volunteered more at the shelter, not because of punishment or penance, but because she wanted to. The children there began calling her Mama Daisy, a name she never thought she'd earn. Slowly, she began appearing in family gatherings, not as the center, but as a quiet part of the circle. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday suppers. She still sat at the edge, but no one asked her to leave. The quadruplets were growing too. Teenagers now, full of questions, dreams, an inevitable pull toward adulthood. They carried within them a story of betrayal, forgiveness, and renewal, one they were just beginning to understand. And though Daisy never asked for it, she realized the family had given her the rarest of gifts, not just a second chance, but a place, fragile, tentative, yet real, at the table of life she once shattered. The quadruplets were 16 when the quiet ship began. They were no longer the wide-eyed children clinging to their mother's skirts. They were tall, restless, and each carried the spark of individuality that made them impossible to mistake for one another. And yet, no matter how different their personalities, they shared one unspoken curiosity: Daisy. At first, they watched her from a distance. She would arrive at the house carrying fresh bread from the shelter bakery, or a basket of fruit she bought with her own wages. She never stayed too long, always leaving before the evening grew too loud. But her presence was steady, dependable. One Saturday afternoon, as the children studied in the garden, it was Matthew, the boldest of the four, who finally asked a question that had lived quietly between them. "Daisy," he said, setting aside his book, "why did you save us that night?" The others froze, their eyes darting between him and her. Daisy, caught mid-step with a tray of lemonade, stopped. Her hands trembled so slightly that the glasses clinked together. She lowered the tray onto the table and sat, her voice soft. "Because," she whispered, "I couldn't let my worst mistake end with your lives. I thought I had lost everything, but that night I realized I still had something left to protect." Silence settled over the garden, heavy and fragile. Then Rachel, the gentlest of the siblings, reached out and touched Daisy's scarred hand. "We don't really remember the old days," she admitted, "but we remember that night. You ran back for us." The others nodded slowly. In their teenage honesty, there was no grand forgiveness, no rehearsed speeches, just acknowledgement. From that day, Daisy's place shifted again. She became part of their world in small, profound ways, helping Sophia rehearse for her debate competitions, mending Daniel's torn football jersey, or listening patiently as Matthew ranted about the unfairness of exams. She was not their mother, nor did she try to be, but she became something quieter, an anchor, a reminder that even broken roots can give shade. The Thompsons, watching this, felt the change too. Priscilla sometimes caught herself smiling at Daisy without bitterness. Timothy, though cautious, began to see in her not the woman who had once betrayed them, but the one who had chosen fire and pain over leaving their children behind. By the time the quadruplets reached 17, they no longer introduced Daisy as a visitor. They called her family. The year the quadruplets turned 18, the house brimmed with change. College applications, part-time jobs, late-night study sessions. The rhythm of family life shifted into something more frantic, more uncertain. Through it all, Daisy remained a constant. She never intruded, never pushed, but the children, now young adults, sought her out more than anyone expected. One rainy evening, after the acceptance letters had arrived, the four gathered Daisy in the living room. They had planned this moment carefully, though their nerves betrayed them. Hands fidgeting, eyes darting, hearts pounding. Rachel spoke first, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Daisy," she said, "we've been talking about the future, about what family means." Matthew leaned forward, his usual confidence softening into sincerity. "You've been here for us, even when you didn't have to be. You didn't just save us once. You've been saving us in little ways ever since." Sophia added, "We don't want you to keep standing at the edge of this family. We want you in it, fully." Finally, Daniel, quiet, thoughtful Daniel, pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He placed it on the coffee table, in front of her. "It's a petition," he said simply. "We've all signed it. We want to make it official. We want you recognized as our guardian too. Not replacing Mom, never that, but as someone who belongs to us, and we to you." Daisy stared at the paper, as if it were glowing. Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears blurred her vision, until she could no longer read the name scrawled across the page. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Rachel squeezed her hand. "Maybe not for the past, but for the present and the future, you do." That night, Oliver and Priscilla stood in the doorway, silent witnesses to the scene unfolding. For the first time, Priscilla's heart loosened completely. She stepped forward, laid a hand on Daisy's shoulder, and said, with a voice full of both history and release, "Then let it be so." And in that moment, Daisy Thompson was no longer a shadow on the edge of their lives. She was family, fully, finally, and forever. The quadruplet stepped into adulthood carrying Daisy's name stitched quietly into their lives. Rachel, the most empathetic, pursued social work. At her university graduation, when she delivered a speech about second chances and the power of quiet redemption, she locked eyes with Daisy in the crowd. Her words weren't abstract. They were born of Daisy's scars and resilience. Matthew, ever the bold one, studied law. In his final year, he wrote a paper on restorative justice, citing Daisy's story, without naming her, as proof that those once condemned could still become pillars of healing. Daisy sat beside him when he took his oath at the bar, her hand shaking with pride. Sophia, sharp and articulate, became a journalist. She wrote features on underfunded shelters and the people who kept them alive. When she interviewed Daisy one evening for an article, she struggled to keep the lines between family and subject. The piece went viral, titled, "The Woman Who Saved Herself by Saving Others." And Daniel, thoughtful Daniel, followed a quieter path. He became a teacher, working in a small community school. Every year, he told his students about a woman who chose fire over fear, scars over silence. And he told it not as history, but as inheritance. Through it all, Daisy was there. She grew older, her hair streaked with gray, but she was never absent. She attended weddings, sat in hospital waiting rooms, cradled grandchildren who called her Nana Daisy without hesitation. One Christmas, long after the quadruplets had built their own homes and lives, they all returned to the Thompson estate. The house rang with laughter, the walls alive with new generations. As Daisy sat in her chair by the fire, a toddler climbed into her lap, tugging at the hem of her sweater. "Tell me a story, Nana," the child said. Daisy smiled, her scar hands cradling the child's small fingers. "Once," she began, "there was a woman who made mistakes, big ones. But she learned that love can grow even in the ashes." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were bright. Around her, the family listened, not because they needed to hear it, but because they wanted the next generation to remember. Daisy Thompson, once the shadow of betrayal, had become the living root of redemption. In Daisy's final years, the Thompson home had changed. The large house that once carried Oliver's grief now echoed with the chatter of grandchildren and the steady rhythm of life. Daisy, though slower on her feet, remained its quiet center. She spent her mornings tending the garden. The roses she planted years ago bloomed wildly, a living testament to the season she had survived. Sometimes, Neighbors would see her bent over with her cane, whispering to the flowers as if they could answer. Her evenings were for storytelling. She never tired of recounting the journey, the mistakes, the pain, the fire that nearly consumed her, and the grace that pulled her back. But she told it differently each time, not as confession anymore, but as guidance. One autumn, sensing her body's frailty, Daisy gathered the quadruplets in the living room. Rachel, Matthew, Sophia, and Daniel sat quietly, each of them holding her gaze. "I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't let my story die with me. Tell it to your children and theirs after them, not because I was special, but because forgiveness is stronger than shame. That's the only reason I've lived this long." Tears shone in her eyes, but they nodded. Not long after, Daisy passed peacefully in her sleep, a faint smile on her lips, as though she had been dreaming of the family she never thought she'd have. Her funeral was not somber, but radiant. People from shelters, schools, churches, and entire communities came to pay their respects. They spoke not of Daisy's sins, but of her transformation, how she had fed them, housed them, or simply listened when no one else would. Rachel read a eulogy that ended with, "She wasn't perfect, but she was proof that love can rewrite even the darkest story." Years later, Daisy's great-grandchildren still gathered by that same fireplace, tugging at the sleeves of their parents, asking, "Tell us about Nana Daisy." And so, her story lived on, woven into every generation, not as a secret, but as a light. The quadruplets carried Daisy's words deep in their hearts, and as they grew into adulthood, each passed on her legacy in their own way. Rachel, now a teacher, often told her students about a woman who had once been broken but found healing through forgiveness. "Mistakes don't define you," she'd remind them, "but what you do after does." Many children clung to those words like lifelines. Matthew became a doctor, inspired by Daisy's devotion to shelter children. He worked long hours in pediatrics, treating sick and abandoned infants. His colleagues noticed how he lingered by their cribs, whispering softly, almost as if he were repeating Daisy's comfort to them. Sophia, with her artistic soul, painted Daisy's roses on canvas after canvas. She built a gallery called the Garden of Redemption, where each painting carried a story of brokenness restored. People came not just to see the colors, but to feel the forgiveness inside them. Daniel, ever pragmatic, became a lawyer, but he specialized in family law, often defending mothers struggling to keep their children. In court, he carried Daisy's memory like armor, fighting not just for justice, but for second chances. When the quadruplets had children of their own, Daisy's story became their bedtime tale. It was not wrapped in fantasy, but told with honesty. The little ones listened wide-eyed. "She was once selfish," Matthew's son whispered, "but she became kind," Sophia's daughter added, "and she loved us all in the end." Rachel's twins would finish together. One summer evening, the family gathered at Oliver's old estate, now restored as a home where multiple generations met. The great-grandchildren ran through the garden, chasing butterflies among the roses Daisy had planted. As the sun dipped low, Rachel stood by the vines and whispered, "She's still here. Every laugh, every bloom, she's part of it all." And in that moment, it was clear Daisy's story had become more than memory. It was a living inheritance, shaping choices, inspiring compassion, and reminding every child born into the Thompson line that redemption was always possible. The great-grandchildren grew up in a house where Daisy's name was never spoken with shame, only with reverence. Each of them carried a piece of her legacy, though in different ways. Amelia, Rachel's eldest, was bold and outspoken. She dreamed of becoming a journalist, determined to tell stories that expose injustice. Whenever she doubted herself, she'd sit in the garden where Daisy's roses grew and whisper, "Nana Daisy, help me find the truth." Noah, Matthew's son, was gentle and thoughtful. Though brilliant in science, his heart leaned toward service. He often visited shelters with his father, offering to tutor children or simply play with them. He once told his mother, "If Nana Daisy could turn her mistakes into love, then I can turn my gifts into help." Elena, Sophia's daughter, had Daisy's resilience. She wasn't the strongest in class, often teased for her quietness, but she carried herself with dignity. When bullies tried to push her down, she remembered Daisy's story and told herself, I can rise too. Liam, Daniel's boy, had Daisy's fire. Restless and headstrong, he often clashed with teachers and even his parents. Yet, whenever he visited the old family estate, something softened in him. He would sit by Daisy's cane, preserved in the hallway, and whisper, You made it right. I'll find my way, too. One Christmas, when all the great-grandchildren gathered, Amelia suggested they create something together, the Daisy Foundation. We're living proof that her story matters, she told them. Let's keep it alive, not just for us, but for others who need hope. And so they began. With guidance from their parents, they started small, school projects, community service, scholarships for children in shelters. But their vision grew. Soon, the Daisy Foundation became a recognized charity across the city, known for championing second chances. Whenever they were asked why they cared so much, Amelia would always answer the same way. Because once upon a time, a woman everyone had given up on was forgiven, and that forgiveness became our inheritance. The Daisy Foundation grew beyond what the great-grandchildren imagined. What began as a family initiative, raising funds at school fairs, volunteering at shelters, soon blossomed into something far larger. Local newspapers began covering their efforts, noting how a group of young people were inspired not by wealth or fame, but by the story of their great-grandmother's redemption. A family's legacy of forgiveness sparks a citywide movement, one headline read. Within 3 years, the foundation opened its first official center in Lagos, a modest building with bright walls, a library stocked with donated books, a kitchen that served hot meals daily, and dormitory for women and children seeking safety. Above the entrance, carved in stone, were Daisy's words, "Forgiveness is stronger than shame." The impact was immediate. Runaway teens found shelter. Mothers escaping abuse discovered hope. Abandoned children were given not just food, but tutors, mentors, and love. Each of the great-grandchildren took on a role. Amelia spearheaded media campaigns, ensuring Daisy's story reached thousands. Noah developed after-school programs in science and math for disadvantaged kids. Elena organized quiet support circles for victims of bullying and abuse, her gentle strength a refuge for many. Liam surprised everyone by channeling his fire into advocacy. He became the foundation's voice in political halls, lobbying for laws to protect abandoned and orphaned children. The Thompson family home became the foundation's headquarters, its garden a symbol of growth. Every anniversary of Daisy's passing, the family and community gathered by the roses to light candles and share stories of how the foundation had touched their lives. Soon, Daisy's name was no longer just a family tale. It became a beacon across the city. Other communities reached out, asking for branches, for guidance, for the model to be shared. What had started with a broken woman's second chance became a generational movement of healing and hope. And always, when asked why, the great-grandchildren answered the same. Because forgiveness gave us back our family. Now we give it to the world. Requests from other African countries began pouring in. Ghana wanted guidance on opening shelters for street children. Kenya invited the Daisy Foundation, a partner on educational programs for girls. South Africa sought their expertise on community healing after cycles of violence. By the time the great-grandchildren were in their late 20s, the foundation had expanded beyond Nigeria. Branches opened in Accra, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and even London, where Nigerian immigrants proudly carried Daisy's story as a banner of resilience. International NGOs began to notice. UNICEF invited Amelia to speak at a global summit on children's rights. Liam testified before the Nigerian Senate, urging for stronger protections for abandoned infants. Elena was featured in a BBC documentary, The Power of Quiet Forgiveness, showcasing her work with survivors of abuse. Noah partnered with universities to create scholarships for underprivileged but gifted children, naming the first one the Timothy and Tina Scholars Program, a tribute to the lost innocence of his great-grandmother's separated children. Everywhere they went, Daisy's story resonated. Audiences wept when they heard how a bitter, manipulative woman had found redemption in her final years, and how her forgiveness had lit a fire of compassion across generations. And in Lagos, at the heart of it all, the original center remained the sacred root. Every December, the entire Thompson family, elders, children, and volunteers, gathered there. Together, they told Daisy's story by candlelight, beneath the same carved words. Forgiveness is stronger than shame. It was no longer just a family legacy. It was a global movement. The invitation came in a sealed envelope with the United Nations emblem embossed in gold. Amelia, now 30, opened it with trembling hands. It was official. She had been chosen to deliver the keynote address at the UN General Assembly on forgiveness, family, and the future of children. On the day of the speech, the great-grandchildren sat together in the front row, hearts pounding as Amelia walked to the podium. The vast hall fell silent. Flags of every nation hung around her, and cameras broadcast her words across the globe. She began not with statistics or policies, but with a story. My great-grandmother, Daisy Thompson, was once a broken woman. She hurt others. She lied, manipulated, and caused pain. But in the end, she found forgiveness, not from strangers, but from her own family. That forgiveness saved her. And it gave birth to the Daisy Foundation, which today shelters thousands of children worldwide. A hush rippled through the chamber. Some delegates leaned forward, visibly moved. Amelia continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We live in a world where shame is often a prison. But my family discovered something greater. Shame can be broken by compassion, and compassion can heal generations. Daisy's roses still bloom in our family garden, reminding us every day that forgiveness is stronger than shame. That is why we stand here, not to honor one woman, but to honor the truth that no life is beyond redemption. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Delegates stood, some wiping tears from their eyes. The UN Secretary-General himself came forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Today, he announced, we recognize the Daisy Foundation not just as a charity, but as a global beacon of hope. May every nation learn from this legacy of forgiveness. At that moment, Daisy's name, once whispered in disgrace, was spoken with honor on the world stage. After the ceremony, the Thompson family gathered in a quiet UN garden, away from cameras and officials. The air was cool, and the fountain nearby trickled softly. Oliver, his hair silver now, but his eyes still sharp, stood with Diana by his side. He looked at Amelia, Noah, Elena, and Liam, and then at his grandchildren clustered around them. His voice trembled. Do you realize what just happened in there? He asked. The world spoke Daisy's name with honor. A woman we once pitied, a woman we once feared. Today she was remembered as a light. Diana wiped her eyes. It's as if her soul has been set free. What she longed for, redemption, forgiveness, it has blossomed fully through you all. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, she took a pressed rose petal, carefully preserved between glass. This came from Mama Grace's garden, she whispered. The last rose Daisy ever tended. They all leaned closer, reverently. Tonight, Elena continued, we honor her not with shame, but with pride. This rose is proof that even the most broken person can bloom again. The 4 great-grandchildren joined hands around their elders. Noah's voice was steady. We carried her story to the world. Now, the world carries her legacy with us. In that circle, beneath the moonlight and the soft murmur of the fountain, they felt Daisy's presence, not as the bitter woman she once was, but as a forgiven matriarch whose second chance had become the foundation of a movement. And though none spoke it aloud, they all knew the story had come full circle. Years later, the Thompson family home was alive with the chatter of children. The garden, once Daisy's quiet refuge, had been transformed into a living classroom. Great-great-grandchildren sat in a circle beneath the old mango tree, notebooks in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. Amelia, now older, stood before them with a gentle smile. In her hands, she held a worn leather journal, Daisy's. Its pages were yellowed, but the words inside had shaped generations. Today, Amelia said softly, you will hear the story that made us who we are. The children leaned closer. Little Faith, only 7, whispered, is this about great-great-grandma Daisy, the one who planted the roses? Yes, Amelia replied, opening the journal. But before she planted roses, She planted pain. She made mistakes, big ones. She hurt people she loved. But she also found something greater than her mistakes: forgiveness. The children listened rapt as Amelia recounted Daisy's journey: the jealousy, the betrayal, the fall, and the remarkable transformation in her final years. She told them how forgiveness had turned a life of shame into a legacy of hope, and how the Daisy Foundation now stood in cities across the world because one woman had dared to change. When she finished, the garden was silent. Then young Emmanuel raised his hand. "So, does that mean no one is ever too bad to be forgiven?" Amelia's voice trembled as she answered, "Exactly. That's the lesson Daisy left us. No one is beyond redemption." The children nodded solemnly, their young hearts already carrying the weight of the story. Then, as if on cue, one of them ran to the rose bush that still bloomed in the corner of the garden. He plucked a single flower and placed it in the center of the circle. "Let's keep her promise alive," he said simply. And so, beneath the same sky that had watched Daisy's struggles and triumphs, another generation took up her story. The circle widened, the legacy deepened, and the roses kept blooming, year after year, child after child, whispering the same truth into the wind. Forgiveness is stronger than shame. A century later, school children across Africa opened their history textbooks to a chapter titled "The Daisy Thompson Legacy: Forgiveness That Changed the World." The pages told the story not of a saint, but of a flawed woman who had once been consumed by envy, only to be transformed by forgiveness. Alongside her story were photographs: Daisy's original rose garden, the first Daisy Foundation Center in Lagos, and Amelia at the United Nations, delivering the speech that made the world listen. In Abuja, a sprawling glass and stone building stood proudly, the Daisy Global Center for Forgiveness and Child Welfare. Inside its atrium, a towering sculpture arose, carved from marble, reached toward the ceiling. Beneath it was inscribed, "No one is beyond redemption." Visitors came from every nation: survivors of war, refugees, abandoned children, and leaders seeking peace all walked those halls. They learned of Daisy's journey, and many left believing anew in second chances. In Lagos, the original Thompson family home had been preserved as a heritage site. Every year, great-great-great-grandchildren gathered in the garden, telling the story under the mango tree, just as Amelia once had. The roses still bloomed, carefully tended by each generation. And in that garden, a little girl, descendant of Daisy, looked up at her mother and asked, "Will people always remember her?" Her mother smiled, brushing soil from her hands as she planted a new rose bush. "As long as there is someone willing to forgive, Daisy will never be forgotten." The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of roses across the yard, as if Daisy herself whispered through time, "Forgiveness is stronger than shame." The camera would pan slowly across the rose garden at dusk, golden light spilling over the petals. Children's laughter echoed faintly as shadows lengthened, their voices blending with the soft hum of cicadas. The frame would pause on the marble plaque at the garden center. A single rose, freshly placed, leaned against the inscription. As the screen darkened, Daisy's voice, gentle, resolute, would rise, not as a ghost, but as a memory carried forward. "If forgiveness can bloom in me, it can bloom in anyone. Let it bloom in you." The rose glimmered in the fading light. The scene would fade to black. The rose glimmered in the fading light, and the sound of footsteps approached slowly from the path. Zion's youngest daughter, Amira, no older than 7, skipped forward, her small hands holding a sketchbook. She stopped by the plaque, knelt carefully, and began to draw the roses around it with a child's steady focus. Behind her, Rowan watched with quiet awe, the dusk softening his sharp features. Zion slipped an arm around him, pulling him close. No words passed between them, but the silence brimmed with understanding. "Papa," Amira said suddenly, looking up, "if Daisy forgave herself, does that mean everyone can?" Zion bent down beside her, his hand brushing over her curls. His gaze lingered on the rose she had traced onto the page. "Yes, little one," he whispered. "Everyone can." Amira smiled, tore out the page, and placed it gently beside the rose leaning against the plaque. Then she stood and ran off toward the laughter in the distance, her sketchbook bouncing at her side. Rowan's hand tightened in Zion's, their joined shadows stretching long across the garden as night slowly folded in. The family walked deeper in the garden, their steps softened by the gravel paths and the whisper of leaves overhead. DJ carried a small lantern, its glow casting warm rings of light across the flowers. He stopped at a quiet corner where the roses grew wilder, less trimmed, almost reaching toward the sky. From his pocket, he pulled a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, as if held many times. Carefully, he laid it among the roots of a rose bush. Rowan noticed a faint handwriting. Lines of a poem, scrawled in DJ's unmistakable hand. Kia followed behind, her fingers grazing each bloom, as though greeting them one by one. She placed a polished river stone at the base of another bush, murmuring something too soft catch. Grant, older and slower, leaned on his cane. He reached into his coat and revealed a pressed flower, long kept between book pages. He pressed it against the plaque before letting it rest on the ground. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Only a long exhale of release. One by one, they left something. A page, a stone, a flower, a whisper, each token sinking into the garden's growing memory. At last, Zion and Rowan remained. Rowan bent, picking a single rose. Careful not to break its stem, he slipped it into Zion's hand. "This one's yours," he said softly. Zion placed on the plaque, his palm lingering against the cool marble. The night air stirred, carrying the mingled scent of earth, roses, and something unspoken, something that felt like presence. The night breeze lifted, soft at first, then steady, threading to the roses until their petals trembled like tiny voices. The lantern DJ carried flickered, its light swaying in rhythm with the wind. Rowan tilted his head, eyes narrowing as if he could almost hear words in the rustle. Zion did too. The air smelled richer, sweeter, the roses breathing out more fragrance than before. A hush fell over the family. No one spoke, yet each of them felt it. The quiet pulse of something alive in the garden. The leaves brushed against one another with a cadence that was neither random nor chaotic, but almost like speech. Kia pressed a hand to her chest. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. DJ nodded, his voice hushed. "It's like the garden's answering." Grant, his weathered face turned toward the sky, exhaled deeply. "No," he murmured. "It's her answering. Through the roses." The petals quivered again, and the breeze seemed to move in circles, as if wrapping them all in an unseen embrace. The feeling was not haunting, but steady, like forgiveness made into air, made into breath. Amira, still clutching her sketchbook, ran back and nestled between Zion and Rowan. "She's happy now," she said with childlike certainty. "I can feel it." And for the first time in years, no one questioned. They all believed. The family lingered in the garden, the night around them thick with memory. Zion knelt and touched the soil, his fingers pressing lightly as though sealing every offering into the earth. "We'll come back," he said quietly. "Not just tonight. Every year, we'll bring something new, something of us. Let this place carry more than Daisy's forgiveness. Let carry all of ours." Rowan nodded, eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. A circle that never breaks. Kia brushed her palm across the plaque, then turned to her grandchildren. "Then it's decided. Each year, each of us will leave something. Words, sketches, flowers, stones. The garden will remember what we cannot always speak." Amira lifted her sketchbook high. "I'll draw something different every time." DJ smiled, laying a hand on her shoulder. "And I'll write something. Maybe not just poems. Maybe stories, too." Grant chuckled softly, though his voice cracked with age. "I'll get whatever I have left, pressed flowers, old pages, perhaps even silence." The roses swayed gently, as though agreeing. Zion straightened, his hand tightening in Rowan's. "Then it's a ritual," he said. "The garden of return. Every year, on this night, we come back." The family stood in a circle, the lantern casting their shadows across the blooms. None of them spoke the word aloud, but each carried the same thought. This garden was no longer only daisies. It was theirs now too a year later. The garden waited in its quiet patience. The roses had grown taller, fuller, their fragrance thick in the evening air. The plaque gleamed softly in the lantern light as the family gathered once more. Amira came first, skipping ahead of the others. She knelt quickly and pulled out her newest sketch, a full-page drawing of the rose bushes with faces hidden inside the petals, smiling. She tucked it carefully under the stone her grandmother had placed a year before. DJ arrived next, unfolding a notebook. His handwriting had grown sharper, steadier. He read a single line aloud before placing the page at the roots of a bush. "Forgiveness is not an ending, but a rhythm. I choose to keep it." Kia followed with another river stone, this one painted with swirling colors by her grandchildren. She set it beside the first stone, making a small pile. Grant, slower now, bent with help from Rowan. From his coat, he revealed a thin book of pressed flowers. He laid it across the plaque, his hand trembling but firm. "I thought she would like to have them all together," he whispered. Rowan placed a single candle at the center of the circle and lit it, its flame steady against the breeze. Zion stood last, holding nothing in his hands. Instead, he closed his eyes and spoke. "I give the promise I kept. I came back." The roses stirred, their petals trembling as the air thickened with fragrance. The flame flickered, but did not go out, and once again each of them felt it, the answering hush, the voice of the garden, alive in the wind. Word spread slowly at first, just whispers in the neighborhood. A friend of Rowan's visited and noticed the stones, the papers, the flowers laid carefully beneath the rose bushes. Another week, a colleague of Zion's came, bringing a folded prayer written in hurried ink. By midsummer, the garden was no longer just for family. Neighbors arrived at dusk, leaving tokens without speaking. A photograph, a bead bracelet, a torn letter. Strangers passed by and felt drawn in. Some came only to sit quietly on the benches, listening to the rustle of the roses as if they carried answers. The family never turned anyone away. Catherine even placed a small wooden box near the entrance with a simple inscription: "Leave what you must. Take what you need." Inside, people began dropping notes of grief, confessions, blessings, names of the lost. Others came later to read, to find words that matched their own silence. One evening, Kia walked the path and found a cluster of school children kneeling by the bushes. They whispered their secrets into the soil, then pressed their palms flat to the earth as though planting them. She smiled and said nothing, only left them to their ritual. The garden had become more than memory. It was a vessel, filling and refilling with what people could not say elsewhere. It was return, not only for Diana, but for anyone who needed a place where silence was heard before autumn. The garden began to shape itself around the people who visited it. A choir from the local church asked if they could rehearse softly among the roses, believing the air carried their voices more sweetly there. A painter set up her easel at dawn, returning each week with new canvases, capturing how light touched the petals differently with the seasons. The box at the entrance overflowed. Catherine and Mama Grace began collecting the slips into a bound ledger. Some were fragments of poetry, others desperate prayers, others simply names scrawled in trembling hands. Kia suggested reading them aloud once a month. So, under lantern light, the family and neighbors gathered, each voice taking turns, carrying strangers' words into the open night air. Something shifted in the community. Old quarrels softened. A man who had not spoken to his brother in 10 years came to garden, read a note aloud about forgiveness, and left a knock on his brother's door. A young mother who had been struggling alone found help after another woman overheard her whispered prayer and sought her out the next day. The garden, without plan or decree, became a sanctuary of return. It held grief without drowning, hope without demand, memory without end. And slowly, people began to say that the roses bloom more brightly here than anywhere else in the city. This is not the end. If you have enjoyed watching the story up to this point, please give this video a thumbs up and type part 9 in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't done so by now. See you in the next.